Ciao.
The news that stopped the music. The telegram was waiting backstage when B.B. King finished his third song. He'd been in the middle of Sweet 16, letting Lucille speak the kind of truth that made grown men remember their first heartbreak, when he noticed Jimmy Crawford, the venue manager, standing in the wings with a yellow Western Union envelope in his hands. B.B. had been performing for 15 years, and he'd learned to read the faces of people who worked in venues. There was the face of satisfaction when ticket sales exceeded expectations, the face of mild panic when sound equipment malfunctioned, the face of barely controlled irritation when headliners showed up late or made unreasonable demands. Jimmy's face wasn't showing any of those familiar expressions. Jimmy's face was showing the kind of careful blankness that people wore when they had to deliver news nobody wanted to hear. The face of someone who'd rather be anywhere else, doing anything else than standing in the wings of a ballroom holding a piece of yellow paper that was about to change someone's life. It was November 18th, 1961, at the Riverside Ballroom in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The venue had been hosting touring acts for 15 years, and its reputation for treating musicians fairly had made it a preferred stop for many performers traveling the Midwest circuit. The ballroom itself was elegant in that understated way that marked quality establishments of the era: polished wooden floors, Art Deco lighting fixtures, and acoustics that seemed designed specifically for live music. B.B. was headlining a package tour that had been selling out venues across the Midwest for 3 weeks. The tour was part of a new strategy by his booking agency to establish him as more than just a regional blues act. They were positioning him for national recognition, booking him into venues that typically hosted more mainstream performers, testing whether his music could connect with audiences beyond the traditional blues circuit. Tonight's crowd of 800 was enthusiastic, responsive, the kind of audience that made performing feel like conversation rather than work. They'd been with him from the opening number, responding not just to the familiar songs, but to the deeper emotional content that B.B. brought to his music. He could feel their attention, their willingness to follow him wherever the music led, and it was the kind of artistic connection that reminded him why he'd chosen this life in the first place. The evening had started perfectly. The sound system was clean and powerful. His band was locked in and responsive, and Lucille was singing with that particular sweetness that made every note feel necessary and true. B.B. had been thinking, during those first 3 songs, that this might be one of those magical performances that musicians remember for the rest of their careers. But now Jimmy was holding that telegram, and B.B.'s stomach was already starting to drop before he knew what it contained. He finished Sweet 16 and told the audience he'd be right back. Walking off stage felt like walking underwater. Everything slowed down, sounds became muffled, and the 20 feet between his microphone and Jimmy felt like 20 miles. "This came for you about 10 minutes ago," Jimmy said, handing over the envelope. "I'm sorry, B.B., I didn't want to interrupt, but the guy who delivered it said it was urgent." B.B. King had received telegrams before. Good news and bad news, business offers and family updates. But this one felt different in his hands, heavier somehow, like the yellow paper was made of lead instead of wood pulp. He opened it slowly, though part of him already knew what he would find inside. "Albert King passed away this morning. Stop funeral arrangements pending. Stop. Please contact home immediately. Stop. Mama." B.B. read the words 3 times before they made sense. His father, Albert King, was dead. The man who'd taught him to drive a tractor, who'd shown him how to plant cotton in straight rows, who'd worked double shifts to keep food on the table when times were hardest. Gone. The world around B.B. seemed to tilt sideways. The noise from the audience beyond the curtain became distant and strange. The bright lights of the backstage area felt harsh and wrong. Everything familiar suddenly felt foreign. "B.B.!" Jimmy's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You okay?" B.B. looked up from the telegram, though it took effort to focus on Jimmy's concerned face. "My father," B.B. said, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "He died this morning." Jimmy's expression shifted to sympathy. "Oh man, I'm so sorry. Look, don't worry about the show. I can make an announcement, tell people you had a family emergency. These things happen. People understand." That would have been the normal thing to do. The expected thing. The human thing. When someone's parent dies, they don't continue working as if nothing has happened. They stop everything, make arrangements, go home to grieve with family. But as B.B. stood there holding the telegram, he could hear the audience beyond the curtain. They were clapping rhythmically, calling for him to come back out. 800 people who'd paid their hard-earned money to hear him play, many of whom had probably never seen him perform live before and might never get another chance. And underneath their calls, B.B. could hear something else. The echo of his father's voice from 20 years earlier, when B.B. was 12 years old and had wanted to quit school to help with farm work. Boy, when you make a commitment to something, you see it through. Doesn't matter how you feel about it in the moment. Doesn't matter what else is happening in your life. You gave your word, so you keep your word. That's what separates men from boys. Albert King had been talking about school, but the lesson was bigger than that. It was about integrity, about the difference between what you felt like doing and what you were supposed to do. Albert had lived that principle every day of his life, working jobs he didn't like to support his family, keeping promises even when they became inconvenient, showing up when people depended on him regardless of his personal circumstances. BB remembered the morning when Albert had walked 5 miles to work with a fever of 102 degrees because the cotton gin couldn't afford to lose a day during harvest season. He remembered his father sitting at the kitchen table every night after 16-hour workdays, helping BB with arithmetic even though Albert himself had only finished 3rd grade. He remembered the way Albert would put on his one good shirt every Sunday morning for church, no matter how tired he was, because he'd made a commitment to his faith and his community. Those memories felt both distant and immediate now. Standing in the wings of the Riverside Ballroom with a telegram announcing that the man who'd taught him about integrity was gone forever. But the memories also carried Albert's voice, as clear as if he were standing there in the venue. When people are depending on you, you don't let your personal feelings get in the way of your responsibilities. BB, Jimmy was still waiting for an answer about the show. BB folded the telegram carefully and put it in his jacket pocket right over his heart. "I need to finish the set," he said. Jimmy looked confused. "Are you sure? I mean, nobody would blame you if—" "I'm sure." BB walked back toward the stage but stopped just before reaching the curtain. He turned back to Jimmy. "But I need to tell them, the audience, I need to tell them what happened." "You want to make an announcement?" "I want to be honest with them. They deserve to know why the music might sound different for the rest of the night." BB King walked back onto the stage at the Riverside Ballroom carrying more weight than just Lucille. He carried the news of his father's death, the responsibility of honoring that loss while fulfilling his commitment to the audience, and the complicated mixture of grief and duty that every adult eventually has to navigate. He sat down in his chair, adjusted his microphone, and looked out at the faces watching him expectantly. 800 people who had no idea that the world had just shifted on its axis for the man they'd come to see perform. "Ladies and gentlemen," BB said, his voice steady but somehow different, "I want to share something with you before we continue. About 5 minutes ago, I received word that my father passed away this morning back home in Mississippi." The audience reaction was immediate but varied. Some people gasped audibly. Others leaned forward with concern. A few called out expressions of sympathy, but everyone became more attentive, sensing that something significant was happening. "Now," BB continued, "I could stop the show right here, pack up my guitar and catch the next train home, and I think most of you would understand that." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "But I've been thinking about what my daddy would want me to do in this situation, and I believe he'd want me to finish what I started here tonight. Not because the show must go on, but because when you make a commitment to people, you honor that commitment." BB's fingers found a quiet chord on Lucille. Not quite a song yet, but something to fill the silence. "So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to finish our time together tonight. But I want you to know that the music you hear for the rest of this evening is going to be different. It's going to carry some sadness that wasn't there an hour ago. It's going to carry some questions about life and loss that I'm just starting to figure out myself." He played another chord, this one a little fuller, a little more resolved. "I'm telling you this not because I want your sympathy, but because I believe music is supposed to be honest. And right now, honesty means acknowledging that I'm a son who just lost his father, trying to figure out how to keep living while carrying that loss." The silence in the ballroom was complete. 800 people were hanging on every word. Not because they were curious about celebrity grief, but because they recognized something universal in what BB was sharing. Everyone in that room had lost someone, or would lose someone, or was afraid of losing someone. Everyone understood the weight of love, interrupted by mortality. "My father taught me that you honor the people you love by continuing to be the best version of yourself, even when, especially when, they're not around to see it anymore," BB said. "So the music you hear tonight is going to be my way of honoring him. It's going to be me trying to be the man he raised me to be." BB began playing then, a slow, contemplative melody that seemed to emerge from someplace deeper than technique. The notes carried the weight of everything he'd just shared: the loss, the duty, the love, the confusion of grief mixed with the requirement to keep living. What followed was the most emotionally charged performance of BB King's career to that point. He played songs about love and loss, about growing up and letting go, about the ways that music helps us process experiences too big for ordinary conversation. But more than the song selection, it was the way he played them that made the evening extraordinary. Every note carried emotional weight. Every pause felt deliberate and meaningful. When BB bent a string, it sounded like a human voice crying. When he let a note ring out into silence, it felt like meditation on mortality. The audience was completely silent between songs, recognizing that they were witnessing something rare and precious. They weren't just hearing a concert anymore, they were sharing in a ritual of grief and healing, led by someone who had chosen to transform his personal loss into something that could touch other people's hearts. Martha Johnson, a nurse from St. Paul who had come to the show with her husband, found herself thinking about her own father, who had passed away 3 years earlier. The music wasn't just entertaining her, it was helping her access feelings about loss that she'd been avoiding since the funeral. "I hadn't cried about Daddy in 2 years," she would tell her sister the next day. "But hearing BB play with all that pain in his heart, I realized I'd been holding my breath since we buried him." During an instrumental passage, BB closed his eyes and let Lucille speak directly to his father's memory. The guitar seemed to be asking questions. Why now? What do I do with this pain? How do I keep going without your guidance? And somehow, through the music, answers seemed to emerge. By remembering what you taught me, by being grateful for the time we had, by using this loss to understand other people's losses. The conversation between BB and his guitar became increasingly intimate as the evening progressed. He would play a phrase that sounded like a question, then answer it with a different melodic idea. He would build tension through repetition and release it through unexpected harmonic resolution. Most remarkably, he seemed to be discovering the music in real time, letting his grief guide his fingers to places on the fretboard that created sounds he'd never made before. When BB opened his eyes, he saw that many people in the audience were crying. Not because they were sad for him specifically, but because the music was helping them access their own experiences of loss and love, and the complicated beauty of being human in a world where nothing lasts forever. Robert Chen, a college student who had driven down from Duluth specifically to hear BB play, later wrote in his journal, "I came expecting to hear blues music. Instead, I heard someone teaching a room full of strangers how to grieve with dignity, how to transform the worst moments of life into something that connects you to other people instead of isolating you from them. Music doesn't take away pain," BB said during a quiet moment between songs, "but it gives pain a place to live that doesn't destroy you. It turns suffering into something that can connect you to other people instead of isolating you." He played for another 45 minutes, and by the time he finished, something had shifted in the room. The audience understood that they'd been part of something more significant than entertainment. They'd witnessed the transformation of personal grief into shared human experience through the power of honest artistic expression. When BB finally said goodnight and left the stage, the applause was different from normal concert applause. It was quieter, more reverent, more grateful. People weren't just appreciating good music, they were acknowledging someone who had chosen to be vulnerable and authentic during one of the most difficult moments of his life. Backstage, Jimmy was waiting with practical questions about travel arrangements and schedule changes for the rest of the tour. But before they got to logistics, he asked the question that had been bothering him all evening. "BB, can I ask you something? Why did you decide to finish the show?" "Really?" BB sat down heavily in a folding chair, feeling the weight of the evening settling on his shoulders. "Because my father spent his whole life teaching me that the way you handle difficult moments is what defines your character," BB said. "He never got to see me become successful as a musician, never got to see me play for audiences like this, but he did get to teach me how to be a man who honors his commitments even when it's hard." "But you could have honored his memory by going home to be with family." "I could have. And maybe some people would have made that choice. But this felt like the choice he would have wanted me to make. Not because the show was more important than family, but because keeping your word to people is how you honor everything your family taught you about integrity." BB pulled the telegram out of his pocket and looked at it again. "Plus," he added quietly, "I think he would have liked knowing that his death led to music that helped other people think about their own fathers, their own losses. That would have meant something to him." The rest of the tour was canceled so BB could return home for the funeral and to spend time with family. But the story of the night he chose to finish his show after learning of his father's death became part of his legend. Not because it was the right choice. People disagreed about that for years afterward. Some thought he should have gone home immediately. Others admired his dedication to his audience and his commitment to honoring his father's teachings about integrity. But everyone agreed that his decision to be honest with the audience, to share his grief and his reasoning in real time, had created something extraordinary. A moment when entertainment became something deeper, when performance became a shared exploration of what it means to be human in a world where love and loss are inseparably connected. The Minneapolis Star-Tribune ran a review 3 days later that captured what many in the audience had felt. We came to hear blues music and instead witnessed a masterclass in grace under pressure. B.B. King showed us that artistry isn't about perfection. It's about authenticity. He didn't hide his pain from us. He transformed it into something that helped all of us understand our own pain better. Letters began arriving at BB's booking agency within days of the performance. Audience members wanted to share how the evening had affected them, how his honesty about grief had helped them process their own losses. A widow from Minneapolis wrote about how BB's music that night had helped her cry for the first time since her husband's funeral 6 months earlier. A father from Wisconsin described how hearing BB honor his father's memory had inspired him to be more present with his own children. Jimmy Crawford, the venue manager, kept a copy of the review in his office for the rest of his career. When other performers asked him about dealing with personal emergencies during shows, he would tell them about the night B.B. King proved that the most powerful performances come from truth, not technique. "I've managed hundreds of shows over the years," Jimmy would say. "I've seen performers push through illness, equipment failures, difficult crowds, you name it. But I've never seen anything like watching a man transform his worst moment into his most honest artistic statement." BB didn't just finish that show. He elevated it into something nobody who was there will ever forget. Years later, when interviewers asked BB about that night in Minneapolis, he always said the same thing. "I learned that music isn't about avoiding difficult emotions. It's about finding ways to transform them into something that can help other people feel less alone with their own difficult emotions." That night, my father's death taught me, and 800 other people, something about how to keep living when the people we love are gone. The telegram lived in BB's wallet for the rest of his life, a reminder of the night when personal grief became a lesson in public grace, when loss became a teacher instead of just a tragedy. He would occasionally pull it out during quiet moments on tour buses or in hotel rooms, not to reopen old wounds, but to remember the lesson his father had taught him even in death. That integrity means keeping your commitments, especially when keeping them is difficult. Albert King never got to see his son become one of the most respected musicians in America. He never got to witness the Grammy Awards, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, the international recognition that would follow in later decades. But his influence was present in every performance BB gave after that November night in Minneapolis. Every time BB faced a difficult decision about balancing personal needs against professional obligations, he would remember his father's voice. "When people are depending on you, you show up." Every time he was tempted to give less than his best effort because he was tired or discouraged or dealing with personal problems, he would think about the lesson learned in that ballroom, that the times when you least feel like being your best self are exactly the times when being your best self matters most. And every time he performed after that, BB carried with him the knowledge that the most powerful music comes from the places where joy and sorrow intersect, where the requirement to keep living meets the reality of loving things that don't last forever. Music, he learned that night, wasn't just about making people feel good. It was about making them feel understood, especially when life delivered news that stopped everything else but, somehow, mysteriously, made the music more necessary than ever. The Riverside Ballroom continued hosting touring acts for another 15 years before being converted into office space. But people in Minneapolis still talked about the night B.B. King received news of his father's death, and chose to transform his grief into art that helped a room full of strangers understand something essential about love, loss, and the courage required to keep living beautifully even when your heart is breaking. That telegram, yellow with age and worn soft at the creases from years of handling, remained a testament to a moment when personal tragedy became collective healing, when one man's decision to be honest about his pain created space for 800 others to be honest about theirs. In the end, that may have been Albert King's greatest gift to his son. Not just the lesson about keeping commitments, but the understanding that true artistry comes from having the courage to be vulnerable in front of other people, to let them see not just your talent, but your humanity.